The anniversary cake sat untouched on the dining table. Candles melted into waxy pools, and Grace Kimball's hands trembled as she stared at divorce papers scattered across the floor. The same floor where she'd collapsed an hour ago, mascara streaking her face, begging the man she'd loved for 10 years not to do this. Not today, not on their anniversary. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the channel. Or if you're new here, welcome to a story that's going to absolutely wreck you and then put you back together again. I'm so glad you're here with me today. And I have to ask, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, because I love seeing our global family come together. And seriously, how are you doing today? Before we dive deep into what happened to Grace, and trust me, what happens 5 years later will blow your mind. Have you subscribed yet? If not, hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this need to be heard. They need to be shared. And you absolutely won't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get into it. Grace's knees ached from kneeling on the hardwood, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the hollowness expanding in her chest as she stared at the front door that had closed behind Andrew Gerard 47 minutes ago. She knew because she'd been watching the anniversary clock on the mantel, the one she'd saved 3 months of grocery money to buy him last year, 3 months of store-brand everything, 3 months of walking instead of taking the bus, 3 months of love poured into a single gift that he hadn't even glanced at tonight. You don't fit the image I need anymore. His words circled her mind like vultures, cold and clinical, delivered with the same tone he used in board meetings, the ones he'd started having once his company finally climbed out of debt. The debt she'd helped him survive by working double shifts at the elementary school, tutoring kids after hours, selling her grandmother's jewelry when the bank threatened foreclosure. Grace pulled herself to her feet, legs shaking, surveying the dining room that looked like a crime scene of abandoned hope. Rose petals she'd scattered that morning, his favorite coq au vin that had taken 5 hours to prepare, the wine they'd shared on their wedding night that she'd saved for a decade, unopened, because Andrew Gerard had walked in, seen the celebration she'd arranged, and chosen that precise, calculated moment to hand her dissolution papers. Sign them, he'd said. My lawyer says we can expedite if you don't contest. She'd grabbed his arm. Andrew, please, what did I do? Tell me what I did wrong. And he'd pulled away like she was contagious, saying, You didn't do anything wrong, Grace. You're a school teacher. You'll always be a school teacher. And I'm building an empire now. I need someone who can stand beside me at galas, who understands investment portfolios, who... He'd stopped himself, but the damage was done. Who looks better on your arm? Grace had whispered, the realization hitting like ice water. And Andrew hadn't denied it, just straightened his tie, the tie she'd given him for Christmas, and said, I've already moved my things out. The house is paid off. You can have it. Consider it my apology for the inconvenience. Inconvenience. 10 years, reduced to an inconvenience, and she'd fallen to her knees then, sobbing, clutching the papers, begging him to remember who they'd been, reminding him of their wedding vows, of the nights she'd held him when his father died, of the mornings she'd miscarried their child, and he'd sworn they'd get through anything together, but he'd just said, that was before, and walked out, before his tech company's stock went public, before the money rolled in, before Grace became a before picture in the story of his success. Now, standing in the wreckage of her anniversary dinner, Grace Kimball felt something shift beneath the grief, something harder, something that tasted like metal and fury, and the kind of clarity that only comes from being shattered completely. I want to pause here and ask you, have you ever been underestimated by someone who was supposed to love you? Drop a comment below because your stories matter, and this community thrives on supporting each other. Grace bent down and picked up the divorce papers with steady hands, because Andrew Gerard thought he knew who she was, thought he could categorize her, dismiss her, trade her in like an outdated model. But Andrew had never really known her at all, because the woman he'd married, the one who'd sacrificed everything, who'd made herself smaller so he could grow, that woman was about to disappear, and what would rise from these ashes was something Andrew couldn't possibly imagine. Not yet. Grace walked to the window and watched the taillights of his BMW disappear down the tree-lined street of the neighborhood they'd chosen together. The street where they'd planned to raise children. The street where she'd watered the garden every morning believing she was tending to their future. And she pressed her palm against the cold glass, whispering, "You want to see what I'm capable of. You're going to regret this, Andrew Gerard. Not because I'll destroy you, but because you'll finally see me. And by then, I'll be so far beyond your reach, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you lost." The anniversary candles had burned out, but something else had just ignited. Grace turned from the window, walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a pen, and signed the divorce papers with a signature that didn't shake. Then she made the phone call that would change everything. "Meredith, I need a favor, a big one. I need to disappear for a while." Her friend's voice cracked with concern. "Grace. Oh my God, what happened? Are you okay?" And Grace answered honestly, "No, but I will be. I promise you, I will be." And she hung up, looking around the home she'd poured her heart into. The home that suddenly felt like a tomb of who she used to be. What Andrew didn't know, what he couldn't know as he drove toward whatever new life he'd planned without her, was that Grace had a secret, something she discovered just 3 months ago. Something she'd kept quiet about because she wanted to surprise him on their anniversary. But now that secret would become her salvation, and the only question that remained, the one that would echo through 5 years of transformation, was simple. When Andrew Gerard finally realized what he'd thrown away, when his perfect new life crumbled and he came crawling back, would there be anything left in Grace's heart but ashes? Or would she have already become the phoenix? 6 weeks after signing the divorce papers, Grace Kimball sat in Meredith Yang's cramped apartment above the bakery, surrounded by moving boxes and the smell of fresh bread that drifted up through the floorboards. And for the first time since Andrew had walked out, she allowed herself to cry without shame, not the desperate sobbing from their anniversary night, but the quiet, bone-deep grief of mourning a future that would never exist. Meredith handed her chamomile tea in a chipped mug that read. Nevertheless, she persisted, and settled onto the worn couch beside her, this woman who'd been Grace's college roommate, her maid of honor, the friend who'd warned her years ago that Andrew Gerard was too ambitious to ever be satisfied with simple happiness. "I should have listened to you," Grace whispered, and Meredith shook her head fiercely, her pixie-cut hair catching the afternoon light. "No, you loved him, and love isn't something you should regret, Grace. What you should regret is making yourself smaller for someone who never deserved you in the first place." Grace set down her tea, hands trembling. I don't even know who I am anymore. For 10 years I was Andrew's wife. I was the woman who supported his dreams, who sacrificed her own ambitions, who convinced herself that his success was our success. And now I'm just empty. The truth was more complicated than empty. No, because deep in Grace's chest, beneath the grief and humiliation, lived a terror she hadn't voiced to anyone. What if Andrew was right? What if being a third-grade teacher was all she'd ever amount to? What if she really was too simple, too ordinary, too forgettable to ever be someone's first choice? Her deepest fear, the one that kept her awake at night, was that she'd wasted her entire 20s on a man who'd seen her as temporary from the start. And now, at 32, she'd missed her chance to become anyone remarkable. If you've ever felt like you've lost yourself in someone else's dreams, drop a comment below. You're not alone. And I promise you, Grace's story is about to show you what's possible when you reclaim yourself. Meredith must have sensed the spiral of Grace's thoughts, because she grabbed her hand and squeezed hard. Listen to me. When we were in college, you were the one with the plans, remember? You wanted to open a learning center for underprivileged kids. You wanted to write children's books. You wanted to make a difference. And then you met Andrew and convinced yourself that being his cheerleader was enough. Grace did remember, and the memory ached like a phantom limb. That was before reality hit, before student loans and rent, and Andrew's father dying and leaving us with his debts. And now, Meredith asked gently, now you have your uncle's inheritance, enough to start over, enough to finally chase what you actually want. So tell me, Grace Kimball, who do you want to be? The question hung in the air like a challenge and a prayer. Before Grace could answer, the apartment door burst open, and Meredith's younger brother, Leon Yang, stumbled in. Arms loaded with grocery bags and his usual chaotic energy. I got Oh, sorry, didn't know you had company, he said. Then his eyes landed on Grace, and his expression softened with recognition. Grace, damn, I heard about Andrew. I'm sorry. That guy was always a pretentious... Leon, Meredith warned, but Grace actually laughed, a small broken sound that felt like the first crack in a dam. It's okay. You can say it. He was a pretentious ass. Leon grinned and started unpacking groceries. Well, for what it's worth, I always thought you were too good for him. I mean, you actually cared about people. You spent your Saturdays tutoring kids for free while he was calculating his net worth. There's no comparison. Grace had forgotten how much she'd liked Leon. This 28-year-old freelance photographer who'd never quite fit into conventional success, but seemed genuinely happy anyway. And watching him now, joking with his sister, comfortable in his own skin despite never making more than $30,000 a year, she felt something shift. Leon, can I ask you something? Grace said suddenly. Do you ever feel like you're not enough? Like you should be more successful or impressive or, I don't know, more? He paused, considering the question with unexpected seriousness. Honestly, I used to, especially when I'd see old classmates buying houses or getting promotions. But then I realized I was measuring myself with someone else's ruler. And once I started defining success on my own terms, capturing images that move people, having time for the relationships that matter, waking up excited about my day, I stopped feeling like I was falling short. His words landed in Grace's chest like seeds. Besides, Leon added, pulling out a pint of ice cream and 3 spoons. Being enough for the wrong people is worthless. The question is whether you're enough for yourself. Meredith shot her brother an approving look. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just never listen, he teased, then turned to Grace. Seriously, though, if you need anything during this transition, photos for a new start, someone to help you move, or just a friend to tell you Andrew Gerard is going to spend the rest of his life regretting his stupidity, I'm here. That night, after Leon left and Meredith fell asleep, Grace sat by the window overlooking the quiet street and pulled out the journal she'd abandoned years ago, back when she still believed her dreams mattered, and she wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page. Who I'll become. Beneath it, she began listing everything she'd sacrificed. Her learning center dream, her desire to travel, her love of painting, her plan to mentor struggling teachers, her passion for advocacy, and with each word, she felt the terror of her wasted years transform into something sharper, something that felt almost like purpose. What Grace didn't write, what she barely admitted to herself, was the secret she'd been carrying since the divorce. Andrew hadn't just crushed her heart. He'd made her doubt her worth as a woman, and until she could look in the mirror and see someone valuable, someone worthy of unconditional love, she'd never truly be free of him. Have you subscribed yet? Because what Grace discovers about herself in the coming months will absolutely transform everything. Hit that button now so you don't miss a single moment. The inheritance from her uncle sat in her bank account, $48,000 that represented possibility. And as Grace stared at that number on her phone screen, she made a decision that would set everything in motion. She wouldn't just survive Andrew Gerard's betrayal. She'd use it as fuel to become the woman she'd always been meant to be. And one day, when their paths crossed again, he'd see exactly what he'd thrown away. But by then, his regret would mean absolutely nothing. Because Grace would have already moved so far beyond him that his opinion would be less than dust. The question that haunted her, the one she whispered to the darkness, was simple. Could she really do it? Could she transform this pain into power? Only time would tell, but for the first time since her anniversary, Grace Kimball felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. 3 months into her new life, Grace Kimball stood in line at the corner gas station on a rainy Tuesday evening, holding a lottery ticket she'd bought on impulse with her last $5. The kind of desperate hope that comes from having exactly $73 in your checking account until payday and a future that felt more terrifying than exciting. She'd moved to a small town called Riverside, 200 miles from the life she'd shared with Andrew Gerard, taken a position at the local elementary school that paid less than her previous job, and been living in a studio apartment above a hardware store where the heating barely worked and the shower ran cold more often than not, but it was hers, untainted by memories of anniversary dinners and broken promises. The lottery ticket had been an afterthought, something the clerk suggested when Grace was $3 short for a full tank of gas. And she'd laughed bitterly and said, "Why not? My luck can't get any worse." And now, standing in that same gas station 72 hours later, watching the numbers scroll across the television mounted behind the counter, Grace felt the world tilt sideways as she realized every single number on her crumpled ticket matched the screen. 7, 14, 21, 28, 35, 42. Powerball, 9. The clerk was saying something, but Grace couldn't hear over the rushing in her ears. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process that the ticket trembling in her hand was worth $50 million. $50 million. More money than she could comprehend. More money than Andrew had made from his entire company. More money than existed in her wildest dreams. Miss, are you okay?" The voice belonged to a man who'd stepped up beside her, concern etched across features that Grace registered dimly as handsome. Dark eyes, strong jawline, the kind of face that belonged to movies. And he was steadying her elbow because apparently her legs had forgotten how to function. I think I need to sit down," Grace whispered, and the stranger guided her to the bench outside, rain falling around them. And she clutched the lottery ticket like it might disintegrate. "Do you need me to call someone?" he asked, and Grace looked up at him properly for the first time, noticing the expensive watch that seemed at odds with his casual jeans and Henley, the way he crouched to her eye level like he actually cared whether a stranger was okay. "I just won the lottery," she said, the words sounding insane, and then she started laughing, gasping, crying, all of it pouring out at once while this beautiful stranger sat beside her in the rain, looking genuinely happy for her. "Holy shit, seriously. That's incredible. Congratulations," he said, grinning. "I'm James, by James McAllister. And I know this is surreal, but you need to sign that ticket right now and put it somewhere safe." Grace's hand shook as she pulled a pen from her purse and signed the back of the ticket, then tucked it into her wallet, into her bra, her mind racing. "I don't know what to do. I don't know how to. Oh God, people are going to know. Everyone's going to know. My ex-husband is going to." She stopped, reality crashing down, Andrew would find out. Andrew would see that the woman he'd discarded as too simple, too ordinary, had just won $50 million. And he'd come crawling back with apologies and excuses, and that charming smile that had fooled her for a decade. "Your ex-husband?" James asked gently, and Grace didn't know why she told him. This stranger sitting beside her in the rain outside a gas station. But the whole story poured out. The anniversary, the divorce papers, the humiliation, the 3 months of barely surviving while trying to rebuild herself. Drop a comment if you've ever wanted to show an ex exactly what they lost, because what Grace does next is going to shock you. James listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he said something that changed everything. "Grace, you don't have to tell anyone. You can claim the prize through a trust. Keep your identity completely private, and your ex-husband never has to know unless you want him to." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I'm a financial advisor. Well, I was. I'm sort of taking a sabbatical to figure out what I actually want to do with my life," he admitted. "But I know how lottery winnings work, and if you want to disappear, if you want to use this money without the world knowing, I can help you." Something in Grace's chest expanded, possibility blooming like spring flowers. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." James smiled, and it was different from Andrew's calculated charm. Warmer somehow, more real. "Because 20 minutes ago, I watched you give your last $5 to that kid in the parking lot who was short for his mother's prescription, and anyone with that kind of heart deserves protection, not exploitation." Grace had forgotten about the teenager, had just acted on instinct when she'd seen him counting change with panic in his eyes. "You saw that?" "I was parked right there," James said, pointing to a modest Honda that seemed wrong for someone wearing a watch that probably cost more than her car. "And I thought, there's someone who gives, even when she has nothing. And now the universe just gave you everything. So yeah, I want to help. No strings attached. Just one human being looking out for another." If this story is hitting you right in the feels, make sure you're subscribed, because the transformation that's about to happen is absolutely epic. Grace made a decision in that moment, sitting in the rain beside a stranger with kind eyes and a mysterious past, a decision that would reshape her entire future. She wouldn't tell anyone about the lottery, not Meredith, not Leon, not her coworkers, no one. She'd claim the prize quietly, invest it carefully, and use it not to flaunt her success or get revenge on Andrew, but to become the woman she'd always wanted to be, the woman who made a real difference. And when Andrew Gerard finally learned the truth, it would be because she'd risen so far above him that their paths crossed in his descent. "Okay," Grace said, meeting James's eyes. "Help me disappear." James extended his hand, and they shook on it, and Grace felt electricity in that touch. Something that scared her because she'd sworn off men, sworn off trust, sworn off everything except rebuilding herself. But there was something about James McAllister that felt like fate. Like maybe the lottery wasn't the only gift the universe had just handed her. What Grace didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she sat beside this charming stranger planning her secret fortune, was that James McAllister had his own secrets, his own reasons for being in a small-town gas station at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, and those secrets would eventually collide with hers in ways neither of them could predict. But that was for later. Right now, holding a $50 million lottery ticket and the hand of a beautiful stranger, Grace Kimball felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Power. Over the next 6 weeks, Grace Kimball met James McAllister in coffee shops, library study rooms, and once in his surprisingly modest apartment where he walked her through trust documents, tax implications, and investment strategies that would allow her to claim her $50 million without her name ever appearing in public records. And with each meeting, Grace found herself noticing things she shouldn't. The way James's eyes crinkled when he smiled. How he always ordered her favorite tea without asking after the second meeting. The gentleness in his voice when he explained complicated financial concepts, making her feel intelligent rather than ignorant. "You're a natural at this," James said one evening, as Grace reviewed a portfolio he'd suggested. Diverse investments that would generate passive income while preserving her principal. Most people who win the lottery want to spend immediately, but you're thinking long term, thinking about impact. Grace looked up from the documents, catching something melancholic in his expression. "You sound like you've seen the opposite happen." James's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My father won big in a business deal once, 8 figures, and it destroyed our family. Everyone wanting a piece. Relationships turning transactional. My mother leaving when the money ran out. So yeah, I've seen what wealth does to people. Which is why I left my firm in Chicago." "Chicago," Grace repeated, something cold sliding down her spine. "That's where my ex-husband's company is based." "Small world," James said, but he looked away quickly, and Grace felt the first whisper of doubt. Chicago was a big city, millions of people, but the coincidence nagged at her, especially when she noticed James change the subject smoothly, asking about her plans for the money. Grace pushed the suspicion aside. She was being paranoid, traumatized by Andrew's betrayal into seeing conspiracy everywhere, and focused on the question. "I want to help people, especially women who've been through what I have. Divorces that leave them broken and questioning their worth. Single mothers struggling to make rent. Kids who need educational support. I want to create something lasting." The passion in her own voice surprised her, and James leaned forward, eyes bright. "Then let's build that, Grace. Let's create a foundation that does exactly what you're describing. We can start small, test programs, and scale based on what works." "We?" Grace asked, heart hammering, and James seemed to catch himself. "I mean, if you want help, I'm not trying to insert myself into your life. I just—" He ran a hand through his dark hair, looking genuinely flustered. "I believe in what you want to do, and I have experience structuring charitable organizations. But this is your vision, your money, your decision. Have you ever met someone who feels too good to be true?" Drop a comment about how you knew whether to trust your gut or your heart, because Grace is about to face that exact choice. The problem was that Grace wanted James involved, wanted his expertise, and his steady presence, and the way he made her laugh when the legal documents became overwhelming. But wanting him terrified her, because the last time she'd trusted a man completely, he'd handed her divorce papers on their anniversary. "Let me think about it," Grace said, and something like hurt flickered across James's face before he nodded and gathered his papers. That night, Grace did what she'd sworn she wouldn't do. She Googled James McAllister, and what she found made her blood run cold. There were articles about a financial scandal at a Chicago investment firm, McAllister and Associates, allegations of embezzlement and client fraud. And though James wasn't directly named, the firm had belonged to his family, and there were photos of him leaving the offices looking devastated. Grace's hands shook as she read through the details. How the firm had collapsed, how clients had lost millions, how James's father had disappeared before charges could be filed. And she remembered Andrew's charm, how he'd seemed perfect until he wasn't, and the paranoia bloomed into full panic. Was James using her? Had he somehow known about the lottery? Was this entire chance meeting orchestrated to gain access to her $50 million? She called Meredith, needing her friend's grounded perspective. "Mer, I need you to be honest with me. Am I being stupid again? Am I trusting another man who's going to destroy me?" Meredith listened to the whole story. The lottery, James, the scandal, and then said carefully, "Grace, I hear you, and your fear is valid after what Andrew did. But have you considered that maybe James is running from his past just like you are? That maybe he's in Riverside for the same reason you are, to start over? But what if I'm wrong? What if I let him in and he's just like Andrew? Grace whispered, and Meredith's voice softened. Then you'll survive it again. But babe, you can't let Andrew steal your ability to trust forever. That means he still wins. The next morning, Grace arrived at their scheduled meeting and confronted James directly. I Googled you. I know about your family's firm, about the scandal, and I need you to tell me the truth. Is that why you're helping me? Is this about the money? James's face went pale, then red, and he stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I should have told you. God, I should have told you from the beginning. But I was ashamed. And then the longer I waited, the harder it became. So it's true, Grace said, feeling her heart crack. My father embezzled from clients, and I didn't know until the FBI showed up. But I was a partner, so everyone assumed I was complicit. My reputation destroyed, my career gone, clients who trusted me losing everything, and I couldn't fix it, couldn't make it right, James said, words tumbling out. I came to Riverside to escape, to figure out if I even wanted to be in finance anymore. And then I met you. This incredible woman who'd been betrayed and broken but still gave her last $5 to a stranger. And I wanted to help, not for the money. Grace, I swear, I have my own savings. I don't need. Then why not tell me the truth? Grace demanded, and James turned to face her, raw pain in his eyes. Because for the first time in 2 years, someone looked at me without judgment, without assuming I was a criminal, and I was selfish. I wanted to be James the helpful stranger instead of James the disgraced financial advisor. If you're feeling this tension, hit that subscribe button, because the decision Grace makes next will determine everything. Grace stood there, looking at this man who'd shown her nothing but kindness, whose advice had been sound, who'd asked for nothing in return. And she had to choose. Let Andrew's betrayal make her suspicious of every man forever, or take a risk on someone who might actually be different. Okay, Grace said finally, and James's head snapped up. Okay? I believe you. But James, no more secrets. If we're going to work together, I need complete honesty about everything. Relief washed over his features. Complete honesty, I promise. What neither of them knew was that 300 miles away, Andrew Gerard had just received divorce papers of his own from the woman he'd left Grace for, and his perfect new life was beginning to crumble. 4 months after claiming her lottery winnings through a private trust, Grace Kimball sat across from James McAllister at a small Italian restaurant, celebrating the official launch of her foundation, the Phoenix Fund, which would provide financial assistance and mentorship to women rebuilding their lives after divorce. And she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Andrew destroyed her. Genuine happiness, the kind that came from meaningful work and, if she was honest with herself, from the way James looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world. 2 new beginnings, James said, raising his wine glass, and when their glasses touched, his hand covered hers, warm and steady, and Grace didn't pull away, even though her heart hammered with equal parts desire and terror. James, I need to tell you something, Grace started, but her phone buzzed with a call from Meredith marked urgent, and she apologized, stepping outside to answer. Grace, oh God, Grace, you need to sit down. Meredith's voice shook, and ice flooded Grace's veins. What happened? Are you okay? Is Leon? We're fine. But Grace, I just got a call from my cousin Stephanie. She works at Mercy General Hospital in Chicago, and she recognized a name on the patient donor list. Andrew Gerard's mother. She's been sick for months, terminal cancer, and someone's been paying all her medical bills anonymously, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Grace, the payments are coming from a trust called Phoenix Holdings. The world tilted sideways because Grace had named her trust Phoenix Holdings before creating the Phoenix Fund, and she'd never authorized payments to anyone in Chicago, certainly not to Andrew's mother, the only person in his family who treated Grace with genuine kindness during their marriage. That's impossible. I didn't approve any. Grace stopped, realization hitting like a freight train. James had access to the trust accounts. James who'd helped her set up everything. James who was from Chicago. James who'd been at that gas station the exact night she won. And suddenly every coincidence felt sinister. "Mir, I have to go," Grace said, ending the call and walking back inside where James sat scrolling through his phone. And when he looked up smiling, she saw a stranger. "Did you steal from me?" Grace asked, voice deadly quiet, and James's smile vanished. "What?" "Grace, what are you talking about?" "Phoenix Holdings has been making payments to Andrew Gerard's mother in Chicago, payments I never authorized, and you're the only other person with access to those accounts," she said, and watched his face cycle through confusion to understanding to something that looked like panic. "Grace, I can explain. Please sit down." "You used me," Grace said, backing away, feeling the floor drop out from under her again, feeling like that woman on her knees begging Andrew not to leave. "You targeted me. You knew about the lottery somehow. You've been stealing from me this whole time." Oh, God. Meredith was right. I'm so stupid. I trusted another. "Stop," James said firmly, standing up, and something in his tone made her freeze. "I'm not stealing from you. I authorized those payments, yes, but I used my own money, not yours. I would never touch your money without permission." Grace stared at him. "Why would you pay for Andrew Gerard's mother? How do you even know?" She stopped, another realization crashing over her. "You know Andrew. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, drop a comment and make sure you're subscribed, because what James reveals next changes everything." James's expression crumbled. "I know Andrew. We were business associates years ago, before his company took off, before you divorced, and when my family's firm collapsed. He was one of the people who publicly distanced himself from me, who told investors I couldn't be trusted, who helped destroy what was left of my reputation." "So this is revenge?" Grace whispered, feeling sick. "You're using me to get back at him?" "No," James said desperately, reaching for her hand. But she jerked away. "Grace, please, let me explain everything. I came to Riverside because Andrew's company is buying property here. I was investigating his business practices, trying to find evidence of the corruption I suspected. And yes, when I met you that night, I recognized your name from old photos in his office, and I knew who you were. Betrayal tasted like metal and ash. You've been lying to me for 4 months. I lied about recognizing you, yes, but everything else was real. My wanting to help you was real. The foundation was real. He stopped, jaw working. "My feelings for you are real. Grace, I'm in love with you. And that wasn't part of any plan. That terrified me. Because I knew if you found out I'd recognized you that first night, you'd think exactly what you're thinking now." "How did you know about the lottery?" Grace demanded. "I didn't. I swear I didn't. That was pure coincidence. I was following a lead about Andrew's property deals. You winning was fate or luck or—" "Grace, I didn't orchestrate this." "But you used it," Grace said bitterly. "You saw an opportunity, and you used my pain, my money, my trust to get revenge on Andrew." James flinched like she'd struck him. "I used my own money to help Andrew's mother because she reached out to me months ago, desperate, saying Andrew had abandoned her when his new wife demanded he cut off his financial drains. And I remembered you mentioning how kind she'd been to you. So I helped her, and I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you with news about Andrew." Grace wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But Andrew had taught her that wanting to believe someone and that person being trustworthy were different things. I need the truth. All of it. Right now. Or I walk away and you never see me again. James took a shaky breath. The truth is, I came to Riverside to destroy Andrew Gerard, to expose his corrupt business practices, and watch his empire crumble the way mine did. And then I met you, and you were everything good he'd thrown away. And I fell for you, while helping you build something beautiful from your pain. And somewhere along the way, revenge stopped mattering, because making you smile mattered more. And I was a coward for not telling you sooner. But Grace, I am not Andrew. I would never hurt you for personal gain. Everything I've done has been to protect you. Except lying is hurting me, Grace said, tears streaming down her face. And James nodded, his own eyes wet. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But Grace, I'm asking you to trust me one more time. Trust that what we've built together is real. Trust that I see you, brilliant, compassionate, stronger than you know, and trust that I would rather lose everything than lose you. The restaurant had gone quiet, other diners pretending not to watch, and Grace stood at a crossroads. Walk away safe, but alone, or risk her heart one more time on a man with secrets. What would you do? Tell me in the comments, because Grace's choice right now will determine everything that happens next. I need time, Grace finally said, and she walked out into the night, leaving James standing there, leaving the question of trust unanswered. And for the first time since winning the lottery, Grace felt like she'd lost something invaluable. Grace spent 3 weeks avoiding James's calls, burying herself in Phoenix Fund work, approving grants for 17 women who reminded her of herself. Broken, desperate, believing they'd never be whole again. And every signed check felt like both redemption and emptiness, because the person who'd helped her build this wasn't there to see it. And she hated that she missed him. Hated that, even after his lies, her treacherous heart wanted to hear his voice. Then the email arrived from an address she didn't recognize with a subject line that made her blood freeze. I know what you did, Grace. The message was brief and devastating. $50 million, and you're playing charity saint while my mother dies alone. You always were better at pretending to be good than actually being good. We need to talk. Come to Chicago, or I'll come to you. Andrew. Grace's hands shook so badly she dropped her phone, panic clawing up her throat, because Andrew knew about the lottery. Somehow he knew. And worse, he thought she was deliberately withholding help from his mother, when the truth was James had been paying those bills. James who she'd cut out of her life. James who might have been the only person standing between Andrew's mother and death. If your heart is racing right now, mine was too. Writing this, make sure you're subscribed because the next 48 hours of Grace's life will break her before they heal her. Grace called the number Andrew provided, and his voice came through smooth and cold. Grace, it's been what, 8 months? You sound stressed. How did you find out about the lottery? She demanded, and Andrew laughed. That condescending sound she'd heard 1,000 times during their marriage. Please, I have resources. And when someone starts throwing money around, people notice. Your little Phoenix Fund made some waves, and it didn't take much investigation to trace it back to a lottery trust. So congratulations. You finally became someone interesting. The words hit exactly where he intended, right into her deepest fear that she'd never been enough. What do you want, Andrew? I want you to do the right thing and help my mother. She's dying, Grace, and I know you have the money now. Surely you remember how kind she was to you when you were just a poor teacher married to her son. Your mother, Grace said incredulously. You abandoned her. You cut her off when your new wife told you to. And now you want me to. My new wife left me, took a half of everything and disappeared. My company is hemorrhaging money from bad investments, and I'm trying to hold things together while my mother wastes away in a hospital. So yes, Grace, I'm asking you to help, unless you're as selfish as I always suspected beneath that martyr complex. Grace felt something crack inside her. Someone's already been paying for your mother's treatment, Andrew. For months. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Silence. What? Who? It doesn't matter. But it wasn't me. I didn't even know she was sick until 3 weeks ago, Grace said, and she heard Andrew's breathing change. But you have $50 million, and you didn't think to check on the woman who was the only person in my family who defended you? His words twisted the knife. Because he was right. She'd been so focused on her own pain, her own foundation, her own problems with James that she hadn't thought about the woman who'd held her hand at her wedding, who'd called her after the divorce to say Andrew was a fool, who'd loved her when Andrew hadn't. I'll take care of it, Grace whispered. I'll make sure she has whatever she needs. Too late, Andrew said, voice breaking for the first time. She died yesterday, and I called you because her last words were asking if you were okay. If you'd found happiness after what I did, and I had to tell her I didn't know, that the woman she loved like a daughter had disappeared. So thank you, Grace. Thank you for being exactly as selfish as I was. He hung up, and Grace collapsed, sobbing harder than she had even on her anniversary, because Andrew's mother had been good and kind and deserving of help, and Grace had been so wrapped up in her own drama that she'd failed someone who'd never failed her. She called James without thinking, desperate for the one person who might understand. But his phone went straight to voicemail, and she remembered she'd blocked him, cut him out, rejected every attempt he'd made to explain. Grace drove to James's apartment at midnight, pounded on his door, but his neighbor said he'd left town a week ago. No forwarding address. And Grace realized she'd destroyed the only real connection she'd built since her divorce, because she'd been too afraid to trust, too damaged to believe someone could actually care about her without ulterior motives. Drop a comment if you've ever pushed away someone good because you were too scared to get hurt again. Grace is living that regret right now. The next morning, Grace received a package with no return address containing a flash drive and a handwritten note in James's script. Grace, I'm sorry for lying about recognizing you. I'm sorrier that my honesty came too late. This drive contains everything I found on Andrew's business practices. Fraud, embezzlement, corruption. I was going to use it to destroy him, but revenge doesn't matter anymore. Do what you think is right. My lawyer will handle the dissolution of my involvement in Phoenix Holdings. You don't need me. You never did. You're the strongest person I've ever met. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. James. Grace plugged in the flash drive with trembling hands and found hundreds of documents proving Andrew had been running a sophisticated fraud scheme, stealing from investors, cooking books, the same crimes that had destroyed James's family firm. Except Andrew had been careful enough to avoid detection, and the evidence James had compiled could send Andrew to prison for decades. Grace sat in her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of Andrew's crimes, the rejection of the man she'd fallen for, and the guilt of failing Andrew's mother, and for the first time since her divorce, she wanted to give up completely. Wanted to take her $50 million and disappear to some remote island where no one could hurt her and she couldn't hurt anyone else. Her phone rang with a call from Meredith. Grace, I'm coming to get you. Leon told me you sound like you're drowning. I am drowning, Grace sobbed. I pushed away the only man who's seen me as more than Andrew's ex-wife. I failed someone who loved me, and I have the power to destroy Andrew, but I don't know if revenge makes me as bad as him. And I'm so tired of being strong. I'm so tired of pretending I know what I'm doing. Then stop being strong alone, Meredith said gently. Let me help you. Let your friends help you, and Grace. Maybe it's time to ask yourself what you really want. Not what you think you should want, but what would actually make you happy. Grace looked around her empty apartment, at the foundation documents that meant everything and nothing, at the flash drive that held Andrew's fate, and realized she'd been so focused on becoming someone Andrew would regret losing that she'd forgotten to become someone she actually wanted to be. I want James back, Grace whispered. I want to forgive him and trust him and stop letting Andrew's betrayal poison every good thing in my life. But Mur, what if it's too late? What if I've already lost him? Then you find him and you fight for him the way you wish Andrew had fought for you, Meredith said. But first, you need to decide what to do about Andrew. Grace stared at the flash drive, at the power to destroy the man who destroyed her, and made a choice that would define who she'd become. Grace Kimball spent 2 days tracking down James McAllister, calling every contact she had until Leon mentioned his photography buddy had seen someone matching James's description volunteering at a youth center in a town 60 miles away, and Grace drove there without hesitation, her heart pounding as she walked into the community center and found him teaching a group of teenagers about financial literacy. His voice patient and warm as he explained compound interest to kids who looked like they'd never had anyone believe in them before. When James saw her standing in the doorway, his expression cycled through shock, hope, and careful neutrality. And when the class ended, he approached her slowly, like she might bolt. Grace, what are you doing here? He asked, and she saw the dark circles under his eyes, the weight loss, the evidence that the past 3 weeks had been as devastating for him as they'd been for her. I came to apologize, Grace said, voice shaking. I came to tell you that I was wrong, that I let Andrew's betrayal make me suspicious of everyone. And I pushed away the best thing that's happened to me in years, because I was too scared to trust that you could be different. James's jaw tightened. Grace, you had every right to be angry. I should have told you from the beginning that I recognized you, that I knew Andrew. I betrayed your trust, and you paid for his mother's medical care with your own money. Grace interrupted. You helped me build a foundation that's already changed 17 women's lives. You saw me not as Andrew's ex-wife, but as someone worth believing in. And yes, you should have told me the truth sooner. But James, I've spent 3 weeks without you, and I finally understand something important. What? James asked quietly, and Grace took a step closer. That being safe and alone isn't the same as being happy. That Andrew took 10 years of my life, but I'm the one who's been letting him take the rest. And that trusting you is scary, but losing you is unbearable. Tears streaked down her face. I'm in love with you, James McAllister, and I don't care about revenge or Andrew or anything except having another chance with you. If you're crying right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment telling me you believe in second chances because what happens next is pure hope. James closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. Grace, I fell in love with you the night you won the lottery. When you were terrified and overwhelmed and still worried about that kid in the parking lot. And every day since has only made me love you more. So yes, God, yes. We get another chance. But this time with complete honesty. No more secrets. No more secrets, Grace agreed. And when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. Like every broken piece of her heart finding its match. Like the universe finally giving her something good without conditions attached. They sat in James's car in the parking lot, holding hands, and Grace told him everything. Andrew's call, his mother's death, the guilt that was eating her alive, and the flash drive full of evidence that could destroy Andrew's entire empire. James listened, thumb tracing circles on her palm, and when she finished, he said something that changed everything. Grace, what do you actually want to happen with Andrew? Not what you think you should want, not revenge, not justice, but what would genuinely bring you peace. Grace considered the question, really considered it, and realized the answer had been there all along. I want him to face consequences for his crimes, but not because of me, not because I'm trying to get back at him. I want the people he's defrauded to get justice. I want his victims to be made whole. And I want to be so far beyond him that his downfall doesn't even register as my victory. Then we turned the evidence over to the authorities anonymously, James said. Let the system handle it. Let his victims get restitution, and you focus on building something beautiful instead of tearing down something rotten. Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. But there's something else I need to do first. Andrew's mother deserved better than what she got, from him and from me, and I want to honor her memory, maybe a scholarship in her name, or a wing at the hospital, something that shows she mattered. James smiled, and it was full of pride and love. That's perfect. That's who you are, Grace. Not someone who destroys, but someone who builds. And I want to help you do that if you'll let me. Partners? Grace asked, and James kissed her knuckles. In everything, business and life and whatever comes next. Make sure you're subscribed, because the confrontation that's coming will leave you absolutely speechless. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Grace worked with lawyers to establish the Margaret Gerard Memorial Scholarship for nursing students from low-income families. Fully funded in perpetuity, and James compiled the evidence against Andrew into a comprehensive package for the FBI's white-collar crime division. On the morning they planned to submit everything anonymously, Grace received a call from an unknown number, and Andrew's voice came through, desperate and broken. Grace, please, I know I have no right to ask, but I need help. My company is being investigated. Someone sent the board evidence of financial irregularities. They've frozen my assets. I'm about to lose everything, and you're the only person I can turn to. Grace felt James's hand tighten around hers, supportive but letting her make her own choice. And she took a deep breath, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. Andrew, I'm sorry you're going through this, but I'm not the person you call when your choices catch up with you. Grace, please. After everything we were to each other, Andrew started, but Grace cut him off. After everything we were to each other, you handed me divorce papers on our anniversary because I didn't fit your image. You abandoned your mother who loved you unconditionally, and you build your empire on fraud and lies. So no, Andrew, I won't help you avoid consequences. But I will tell you this. Your mother's medical care was paid for by someone who barely knew her but recognized her goodness. And in her memory, I'm funding a scholarship that will help people she would have loved. Because that's what good people do, Andrew. They build instead of destroy. Who paid for? Grace, was it you? Did you know she died asking about you? Andrew's voice cracked, and for a moment, Grace heard the man she'd married, vulnerable and broken. I know, and I'll carry that regret. But Andrew, the best thing I can do now is make sure her kindness lives on. I hope you find peace. I really do. But you need to do that without me. She hung up, and James pulled her into his arms, and Grace realized she'd finally done it. She'd let go of Andrew Gerard completely, not with hatred, but with the calm detachment of someone who'd moved so far beyond him that he was simply irrelevant. Ready to start the next chapter? James asked, and Grace looked up at him. This man who'd seen her broken and helped her rebuild, who'd made mistakes but owned them, who loved her not in spite of her past, but because of the strength it had forged. More than ready, Grace said, and they walked into the future together. 2 months after Grace submitted the evidence to the FBI, she stood on stage at the Riverside Community Center, preparing to announce the first 10 recipients of the Margaret Gerard Memorial Scholarship. The room packed with local families, press covering the Phoenix Fund's expansion, and James standing in the front row looking at her like she'd hung the moon. When the doors burst open, and Andrew Gerard stumbled in, disheveled and desperate. His expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes wild with the kind of panic that comes from watching everything crumble. "Grace, we need to talk, right now," Andrew demanded, and the room went silent, everyone turning to stare as Grace's past literally crashed into her present. But instead of the fear or shame she might have felt a year ago, Grace felt only a calm, steely resolve. "Andrew, I'm in the middle of an event honoring your mother's memory. If you'd like to stay respectfully, you're welcome. Otherwise, I'll have security escort you out," Grace said evenly, and she watched his face cycle through shock that she'd spoken to him that way, rage that she'd dare, and finally broken desperation. "They're arresting me tomorrow. The FBI has evidence of everything. My lawyers say I'm looking at 15 years. And Grace, I know it was you. I know you did this, and I came to beg you to make it stop, please. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for the divorce, for how I treated you, for all of it. Just please help me." The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing, but Grace remained perfectly composed, and she stepped down from the stage, walking until she stood directly in front of the man who'd destroyed her. The man who looked nothing like the polished executive who'd handed her divorce papers on their anniversary. "Andrew, I didn't turn you in to hurt you. I did it because the 17 investors you defrauded deserve justice, because the employees whose pension funds you stole deserve restitution, and because your mother, who you abandoned, deserved better than a son who only called when he needed something," Grace said quietly, and Andrew's face crumbled. "You know about the fraud? How long have you known?" he whispered, and Grace saw James moving closer, protective but trusting her to handle this. "Long enough to realize that the man I married was always capable of this. That the ambition I admired was actually ruthlessness. And that divorcing me was the best thing you ever did for me, because it forced me to discover who I am without you. If this moment is giving you chills, drop a comment and tell me you're here for Grace's transformation, because what she reveals next is everything." Andrew laughed bitterly. "Who you are without me? You mean a lottery winner playing philanthropist? You think $50 million makes you better than me? At least I earned my money." "You stole your money," Grace corrected. "And yes, I won the lottery. But Andrew, do you know when I bought that ticket?" She watched his confusion, watched him trying to understand why timing mattered. "I bought it 3 months after you divorced me, when I had $73 in my checking account and was living above a hardware store. When I was so broken, I could barely function, but still gave my last $5 to a stranger who needed it more. I won that lottery, not because I deserved it, but because the universe gives and takes without logic. And what I've done with that money defines me, not how I got it." Andrew stared at her. 3 months after. So when I divorced you, you had nothing. You were actually just a school teacher." "I was always just a school teacher, Andrew. But there's no just about it. I shaped young minds. I made a difference in kids' lives. And I was happy doing it, until you convinced me I should want more, should be embarrassed by honest work," Grace said, and she felt something shift, the final piece of Andrew's hold on her dissolving. "And now, I'm still a teacher. I still work at Riverside Elementary 3 days a week because that work matters to me, and I use my resources to help others do the same. So yes, I have money, but that's not what makes me better than you. What makes me better is that I choose to build people up instead of tearing them down." Andrew's knees buckled, and he sank into a nearby chair, and Grace realized he was crying. Real tears that might have moved her once, but now just made her sad for who he could have been. My mother asked about you before she died. She said you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I was a fool to let you go. And Grace, she was right. I destroyed the only real thing I ever had because I thought success meant money and status. And now I have nothing. My wife left. My company's gone. I'm going to prison. And the only person I want to talk to is the woman I threw away. Grace felt James's presence behind her, solid and supportive, and she reached back, finding his hand. Andrew, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning me. But forgiveness doesn't mean rescue. You made choices that hurt people, and now you face consequences. And the best thing I can do is make sure your mother is remembered for her kindness while you're remembered for your crimes. Is there any way I can make this right? Andrew asked desperately, and Grace considered, then nodded. Tell the FBI everything. Cooperate completely. Help them recover what you stole, so your victims can be made whole. And Andrew, use whatever time you have before prison to become someone your mother would have been proud of. Subscribe if you believe in accountability, redemption, and justice, because this is what it looks like when someone finally gets what they deserve. Andrew nodded, defeated, and as security escorted him out, the room burst into applause, and Grace turned to find not just James, but Meredith and Leon there too, her found family who'd supported her transformation, and James pulled her into his arms, whispering, I'm so proud of you. You were magnificent. Grace returned to the stage, hands shaking, but voice steady, and announced the scholarship recipients. 10 students who'd received full funding for nursing school in honor of Margaret Gerard. And as each name was called, as each grateful student took the stage, Grace felt the final pieces of her broken heart seal themselves whole. Not because Andrew had been defeated, but because she'd built something beautiful from her pain. And isn't that the greatest victory of all? 5 years after Andrew Gerard handed her divorce papers on their anniversary, Grace Kimball stood in the sunlit ballroom of the community center she'd funded, watching James McAllister kneel on one knee with a ring that wasn't ostentatious or expensive, but perfectly suited her. Simple, elegant, real. And she didn't need to hear the question, because the answer had been written in every moment they'd built together over the past 4.5 years. Yes, Grace said, before James could even speak. And the room erupted in cheers from the 100 women whose lives had been transformed by the Phoenix Fund. From Meredith and Leon, who'd become godparents to the foundation. From the students receiving Margaret Gerard scholarships. And from the community that had watched Grace transform from a broken divorcee into a force of nature. James slid the ring on her finger, stood, and kissed her like they were the only 2 people in the world. And Grace felt the final ghost of her past dissolve because this was what love looked like. Chosen daily, built on honesty, tested by adversity, and emerging stronger. I can't believe you proposed at the Phoenix Fund Anniversary Gala. Grace laughed against his lips, and James grinned. You told me once that you wanted your second chance at love, to be surrounded by proof that broken things can be beautiful again. So yes, I proposed here, surrounded by women who rebuilt themselves just like you did. If you've been with us this whole journey, drop a comment telling me what Grace's story meant to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because stories like this, stories about resilience and redemption, are what this channel is all about. Later that evening, Grace and James stood on the balcony overlooking Riverside, the town that had become her sanctuary, and she reflected on how far she'd traveled from the woman who'd begged Andrew not to leave. The Phoenix Fund had grown beyond her wildest dreams, serving over 300 women across 5 states, providing not just financial assistance but mentorship, job training, legal support, and community for women rebuilding after divorce, domestic violence, or financial abandonment. The Margaret Gerard Memorial Scholarship had sent 47 nursing students to school, creating a legacy of compassion that Andrew's mother would have loved. Grace still taught third grade 3 days a week because those kids needed her, and she needed them. Needed the reminder that success wasn't measured in dollars but in lives touched. In the way little Emma Chen's face lit up when she finally mastered reading, in how in how Jacob Thompson's confidence grew when someone finally believed in his potential. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, arm around her waist, and Grace leaned into him. "I'm thinking about how 5 years ago I thought my life was over. That being divorced at 32 meant I'd failed at the only thing that mattered. And now I realize Andrew leaving was the beginning, not the end. It was the universe pushing me toward who I was always meant to be." James kissed her temple. "And who's that?" "Someone who builds instead of breaks, who lifts instead of diminishes, who loves openly instead of fearfully," Grace said, then smiled. "And someone who's going to marry a man who sees her, really sees her, and loves what he finds." They'd received news that morning that Andrew had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison but would be eligible for parole in 8 with good behavior, and he'd spent his pre-sentencing time cooperating fully with investigators, helping recover over $30 million for his victims, and writing a letter to Grace that she'd read once, and then filed away, not forgetting, but not dwelling. The letter had been simple, an apology without excuses, an acknowledgement of the woman he'd lost, and a confession that watching her build the Phoenix Fund from prison news clippings had shown him what actual success looked like. And he hoped that someday, somehow, he might become a fraction of the person she'd always been. Grace had written back once, briefly, wishing him genuine rehabilitation and peace. And then she'd closed that chapter permanently, because Andrew Gerard no longer had power over her story. "Have you thought about where you want to get married?" James asked, and Grace turned to face him. This beautiful man who'd made mistakes but owned them, who'd loved her through her worst fears, who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. "Somewhere small, just family and close friends. Maybe the gardens behind the community center where we first kissed after I forgave you," Grace said, and James nodded. "Perfect. Simple and meaningful, just like you." "I'm not simple," Grace protested, laughing, and James's expression turned serious. "You're right. You're extraordinary. You're a woman who turned a lottery ticket into legacy, who chose forgiveness over revenge, who loved again after betrayal. And Grace, I promise you, I will spend every day of our marriage making sure you never doubt that you are seen, valued, and cherished exactly as you are." Tears streamed down Grace's face. Happy tears this time. Healing tears. "I love you, James McAllister, and I can't wait to build a lifetime with you." 6 months later, Grace walked down an aisle scattered with phoenix feathers, symbolic and beautiful, toward James. And when the officiant asked if she took this man, Grace thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, sobbing on her kitchen floor, believing she was worthless, and she wanted to reach back through time and whisper, "Hold on, the best is yet to come." "I do," Grace said, and she meant it with every rebuilt piece of her heart. Thank you for taking this journey with Grace, from her darkest moment to her greatest triumph. If this story touched you, inspired you, or reminded you that endings can become beginnings, leave a comment below sharing your own Phoenix moment. And please, subscribe to this channel because everyone deserves to be reminded that they can rise from the ashes stronger than before. Years later, when people asked Grace about winning $50 million, she'd smile and say the lottery wasn't what changed her life. It was learning that her worth had never been tied to Andrew's perception, that she'd always been enough. She just needed the freedom to discover it. And sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, even if it comes wrapped in heartbreak first. Grace Kimball had begged and sobbed on her anniversary 5 years ago, broken by a man who couldn't see her value. But now, standing beside a man who celebrated her completely, running a foundation that transformed lives, teaching kids who adored her, she understood the truth. Andrew Gerard hadn't destroyed her, he'd freed her, and that freedom had allowed her to become the woman she'd always been meant to be. Not despite the pain, but because of it, rising from the ashes like the phoenix she was always destined to become.